The night my grandson-in-law tried to break into my warehouse, he had no idea I was already inside. Sitting in the dark with the truth that could destroy him resting quietly in my lap. I heard the metal door shake under his hands, once then again, the hollow clang echoing through the empty building like a warning that had taken years to arrive. For the first time in 20 years, I closed my eyes and whispered the promise I made to my husband. Tonight it ends. The motion light outside flickered on, casting thin strips of pale yellow through the cracks in the metal panels. Dust floated through the air like tiny ghosts, and somewhere in the distance a pipe groaned. The old building settling into the night the way it always did. I didn't move. I just listened. There's a strange kind of calm that comes when something you feared for years finally arrives. Not panic. Not anger. Just a quiet certainty that the waiting is over. The door rattled again, harder this time, followed by the low scrape of metal against metal. Daniel was never a patient man. I folded my hands over the leather folder resting on my knees, feeling the familiar texture beneath my fingers, grounding myself in the weight of everything it contained. Years of protection, years of silence, years of love disguised as caution. Outside, his footsteps shifted, pacing, searching. He thought he was hunting for a secret. But he didn't know the secret had been waiting for him far longer than he had been searching. And as I sat there in the darkness, listening to the man my granddaughter loved trying to force his way into the only place I had prayed he would never find, my mind drifted back to the moment this story truly began. The night Eliza brought him home. Eliza has always been the brightest light in my life. After my husband passed, the house felt too quiet, too big for just one person, until she started coming over more often, filling the rooms with laughter and music and stories about her classes, her friends, her dreams. She had her grandfather's kindness, the kind that made her believe the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. So when she called one afternoon and said, "Grandma, I want you to meet someone," I spent the whole day cooking as I used to when my husband was alive, letting the smell of rosemary chicken and fresh bread fill every corner of the house. I told myself I was just excited, but somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered something I couldn't quite name. They arrived just after sunset, the sky painted soft shades of pink and gold, the kind of evening that makes everything feel hopeful. Eliza walked in first, her cheeks flushed, her smile wide and nervous all at once. Her hand was wrapped tightly around his, like she was holding onto something precious. "Grandma," she said, her voice bright. "This is Daniel." He stepped forward with an easy confidence, offering his hand before I even had time to wipe mine on the dish towel. "It's so nice to finally meet you," he said smoothly. "Eliza talks about you like you're her hero." His grip was firm, just a little too firm, and when I looked into his eyes, I felt that small voice inside me grow louder. Not fear, just awareness. We sat down to dinner, the three of us at the same oak table where my husband and I had shared decades of quiet evenings. Eliza talked excitedly about how they met, how Daniel made her laugh, and how happy she was. She glowed with certainty. Daniel listened with a soft smile, his hand resting lightly over hers, nodding at all the right moments. Then he started asking questions. Not about Eliza as a child. Not about family traditions. About the house. "How long have you lived here?" he asked casually, cutting into his chicken. "Almost 40 years, I replied. He nodded slowly. "Must be worth quite a bit now. Real estate's been crazy lately." Eliza laughed softly. "Daniel, you and your finance brain." I smiled politely, but inside something shifted, like a draft through a closed window. Over the next hour, his questions kept coming, wrapped in charm. Did I plan to travel more? Did I ever think about downsizing? Did I have help managing things? Each question is harmless on its own. Together they painted a picture. After dinner, while Eliza cleared the plates despite my protests, Daniel followed me into the kitchen. "You've built something really special here," he said, leaning casually against the counter. "Eliza is lucky. Lucky. Not loved. Not cherished. Lucky." I rinsed a plate slowly, watching the water swirl down the drain. "I think I'm the lucky one," I said quietly. For just a second, the warmth slipped from his face, revealing something sharper underneath, something calculating. Then it was gone. That night, after they left, I sat alone in the living room holding my husband's photograph, tracing the edge of the frame the way I always did when I needed to think. I hope I'm wrong, I whispered into the quiet. But deep down I already knew I wasn't. Weeks passed and Daniel became a regular presence. Sunday dinners, short visits, always polite, always attentive, always watching. I noticed the way he steered conversations toward money, the way he asked about repairs, the way he listened more when I talked about the past than when I talked about anything else. Eliza fell deeper in love, and I watched. One afternoon she told me they were thinking about getting married. Her eyes searched mine for approval, and I felt the weight of a promise settle heavily in my chest. The promise my husband and I made long ago to protect this family no matter what. If he makes you happy, I said softly, forcing a smile, that's what matters. But that night, I drove across town to the warehouse. The building stood quiet beneath a flickering streetlight, its metal walls humming softly in the cool night air. To anyone else it was just an old storage space. To me it was a fortress. I unlocked the side door and stepped inside, the familiar scent of dust and old wood wrapping around me like a memory. Boxes lined the walls, each one holding pieces of a life most people had forgotten. I walked slowly to the back, where a steel cabinet stood against the wall, cool beneath my fingers. This is why, I whispered. Inside that cabinet was everything my husband and I had spent years protecting. Documents, letters, records, truths that could never fall into the wrong hands. Proof that love sometimes means preparing for storms you pray never come. I locked the cabinet and stood there for a long moment, listening to the quiet, remembering the night my husband told me, one day, this might be the only thing that keeps them safe. When I got home I knew what I had to do. I would watch. I would wait. And I would be ready. Months later, when Eliza announced their engagement, Daniel hugged me tightly, thanking me for welcoming him into the family. His grip lingered just a second too long. As they walked out the door, I saw him glance back at the house, his eyes scanning the walls like a man memorizing a map. That was the moment I understood something with perfect clarity. He wasn't just marrying my granddaughter. He was studying her life. Back in the present, the sound of metal scraping against the warehouse door pulled me out of the memory. Daniel was still outside, still searching, still believing he was in control. I opened my eyes and looked toward the faint strip of light beneath the door, feeling the steady rhythm of my own breathing, the calm that only comes when you know you've done everything you could to protect the people you love. He thought he was about to uncover a secret, but the truth was, he had just walked straight into a story that began long before he ever existed. And as I sat there in the darkness waiting, I allowed myself the smallest, quietest sigh. Because after all these years, the promise I made was finally about to be tested. And I was ready. The first time I realized Daniel wasn't just curious was the day Eliza stopped telling me everything. It happened so quietly I almost missed it. For years she had called me about the smallest things, what dress to wear to a party, what recipe to try, whether she should cut her hair. But one afternoon, a week after she and Daniel got engaged, I noticed something different in her voice. Careful pauses, measured words, like someone was listening on the other end. How are wedding plans? I asked, stirring my tea slowly. They're good, she said quickly. Daniel's helping with most of it. He's really organized. I smiled, but I could hear the shift beneath her tone. The subtle way she spoke, like she was choosing words instead of letting them flow. That night, I sat in my living room with the quiet pressing in around me, and I thought about the way Daniel watched people when he thought no one noticed. Not with warmth, with calculation. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of flowers, invitations, and polite smiles. Daniel played the part perfectly. Attentive fiancé, charming guest, the kind of man people describe as solid. But I noticed things others didn't. Like how he always knew where Eliza was. How does he answer questions directed at her? How his hand rested at the small of her back just a little too firmly, guiding instead of comforting. At the bridal shower, I watched him stand across the room, laughing with a group of relatives, but his eyes never stayed away from Eliza for long. It wasn't love. It was surveillance. One evening, a few weeks before the wedding, Eliza came over for dinner alone. The moment she stepped inside, I felt a flicker of relief I didn't even realize I'd been holding. We sat at the kitchen table, the soft glow of the overhead light casting gentle shadows across her face. "You look tired," I said gently. She smiled quickly. "Just busy." I reached across the table and took her hand, feeling how cold her fingers were. "You know you can always talk to me, sweetheart." Her eyes softened for a moment, like she might say something real. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced down and that softness disappeared, replaced by a quick tension in her shoulders. "Daniel, just checking in," she said lightly, typing a response almost immediately. We talked about flowers after that. Safe topics. When she left that night, I stood at the window watching her car pull away. A heaviness settling deep in my chest. It reminded me of a feeling I hadn't felt in decades. The feeling that comes right before you realize something is wrong, but you don't have proof yet. The wedding day arrived bright and warm. The kind of day people call perfect. Eliza looked beautiful, radiant in a way that made everyone smile when she walked into the room. But when Daniel saw her, his expression wasn't awe. It was satisfaction. During the ceremony, I watched his face more than hers, the way his jaw tightened when people mentioned family, the way his smile faltered when the officiant spoke about partnership and independence. When they said their vows, Eliza's voice trembled with emotion. Daniel didn't tremble at all. It was steady, rehearsed. After the wedding, they moved into a modern condo across town. And for a little while, things seemed calm. But calm can be deceptive. The first sign came about 3 months later when Eliza mentioned they were reviewing their finances together. "Daniel says it's important for couples to be transparent," she said casually during a phone call. "That makes sense," I replied, keeping my voice neutral, though something inside me tightened. Over time the calls became shorter, less frequent. When we did talk, she sounded distracted, like part of her attention was somewhere else. One Sunday afternoon, I invited them over for lunch. Daniel arrived carrying a bottle of wine and that same practiced smile. "You really should think about getting some help maintaining this place," he said casually while we sat in the living room. "It's a lot of work for one person." "I manage just fine," I said. He nodded slowly, his eyes drifting around the room like he was taking inventory. Eliza sat quietly beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Later, while she was in the kitchen, Daniel leaned closer to me. "You've done well for yourself," he said softly. "Eliza deserves security." There it was again. Security. Not happiness. Not love. I met his gaze calmly. Eliza deserves to feel safe wherever she is. For a brief second, something flickered in his eyes, irritation maybe, before his smile returned. Months passed, and the distance between Eliza and me grew in small, almost invisible ways. She stopped dropping by unannounced. Stopped calling late at night just to talk. When she did visit, she seemed smaller somehow, like she was carrying something heavy she couldn't put down. One evening, she mentioned Daniel thought it might be a good idea for me to start thinking about the future of the house. "What do you mean?" I asked gently. "Oh, nothing," she said quickly. "Just planning. He thinks we should all be practical." That night, after she left, I drove to the warehouse again. The building stood silent beneath the moonlight, the familiar hum greeting me like an old friend. Inside, the air felt cooler, steadier, untouched by the outside world. I walked to the steel cabinet and rested my hand against it, feeling the quiet strength of everything inside. "Not yet," I whispered, because deep down I knew Daniel wasn't finished. And neither was I. As the months passed, I began to notice a pattern, subtle at first, then clearer with time. Daniel always knew exactly when Eliza had spoken to me. He'd make comments like, "I heard you talk to your grandma today," with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. One afternoon, Eliza called, sounding upset. "Daniel thinks you don't trust him," she said quietly. My heart sank. Why would he think that? He just says you're distant. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the careful web tightening. "I want you to be happy," I said gently. "That's all." "I know," she whispered, but her voice sounded uncertain. After we hung up, I sat in silence, remembering something my husband once told me. "When someone wants control," he said, "they start by changing the story." Weeks later, I got a phone call that confirmed my fears. It was an old acquaintance who worked at the county records office. "I thought you should know," she said carefully. "Someone's been asking questions about property tied to your family name." My fingers tightened around the phone. "Who?" "A man named Daniel." The room felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. After I hung up, I sat very still, letting the truth settle. He wasn't just curious. He was investigating. That night, I drove to the warehouse again, unlocking the door and stepping into the familiar quiet. I walked straight to the cabinet and opened it slowly, looking at the documents inside, the proof, the history, the protection. "He's getting closer," I whispered. For the first time in years, I felt the faint stir of something sharper than worry. Resolve. Because I knew something Daniel didn't. He thought he was uncovering a secret. But secrets have layers. And the deeper you dig, the more dangerous the truth becomes. As I locked the cabinet and turned off the lights, the sound echoed softly through the space, a quiet promise hanging in the air. Back at home, I sat by the window watching the night stretch across the sky, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of inevitability. Daniel was moving pieces on a board he didn't fully understand. And the moment he realized that, everything would change. Daniel discovers the warehouse location, and the first alarm is triggered. The first alarm went off just after midnight. It wasn't loud, just a soft vibration from the small device I kept on my nightstand. But it pulled me out of sleep instantly, my eyes opening to the dark ceiling as my heart settled into a steady, familiar rhythm. For a moment I didn't move. I just listened. The house was silent, the kind of deep quiet that comes when the world is asleep, and every small sound feels amplified. Then the vibration came again, short and insistent. I reached for the device and turned it over in my hand. Warehouse perimeter alert. A strange calm settled over me, the same calm I'd felt years ago when my husband first told me to install the cameras. "Well," I whispered, sitting up slowly, "I suppose we're here." I slipped on my robe and walked quietly into the kitchen, turning on only the small lamp by the counter. The soft yellow light pooled gently across the floor as I opened the laptop and pulled up the security feed. For a moment the screen showed only shadows, the empty lot, the faint glow of the streetlight, the quiet metal walls. Then movement. A figure stepping into the frame. Daniel. He stood near the side entrance, looking around carefully, his posture tense, alert like someone who believed he was alone. But he wasn't. I leaned closer to the screen, studying his face. The tightness in his jaw, the restless way he shifted his weight, the way his eyes scanned the building like he was trying to will it open. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, the glow lighting his face as he checked something, probably confirming the address he'd spent weeks trying to find. For a long moment he just stood there, staring at the door. Then he stepped closer. My fingers rested lightly on the keyboard, not trembling, not rushed, just steady. Because this moment had been coming for a very long time. Watching him standing there pulled me into a memory I had kept buried for decades. Back to a night when the warehouse wasn't a place of secrets, but a place of beginnings. It had belonged to my husband. Back then it was filled with life, crates stacked neatly, the hum of machinery, the smell of oil and sawdust, the sound of his laughter echoing off the walls when Eliza was small enough to run through the aisles pretending they were mazes. He built his business from that building piece by piece, with the kind of determination that comes from wanting to give your family something solid to stand on. But success has a way of attracting the wrong kind of attention. There was a man, a business partner, someone we trusted completely. He handled finances, contracts, the kind of details you don't question when you believe someone is on your side. Until the day everything collapsed. I still remember the look on my husband's face when he walked into the kitchen holding a stack of papers, his hands shaking in a way I had never seen before. "He's been stealing," he said quietly. "Not just money. Everything. Accounts drained. Contracts altered. Loans taken out in my husband's name without his knowledge." By the time we understood what had happened, it was almost too late. The stress nearly destroyed him. Not just financially but emotionally. The betrayal cut deeper than the loss itself. We fought for years to rebuild, slowly reclaiming what we could, but the lesson stayed with us. Trust is fragile. And once broken, you never forget the sound it makes. That was when he started preparing, quietly, carefully, putting documents together, records, proof of ownership, proof of what had happened, making sure everything that mattered was protected. "This stays safe," he told me one night, standing in the warehouse office with a small steel safe open on the desk. No matter what. After he passed, I kept that promise. The warehouse became more than just a building. It became a safeguard. A place where the truth lived untouched. Back in the present, I watched Daniel walk slowly along the wall, running his hand across the metal like he was searching for something hidden beneath the surface. He stopped near the camera, and for a brief second, I saw something in his expression that made my chest tighten. Desperation. Not curiosity. Not ambition. Desperation. Because whatever story he had built in his mind about what was inside that warehouse, he needed it to be true. I closed the laptop gently and sat back, letting the quiet settle around me again. This was no longer suspicion. This was confirmation. The next morning I drove to the warehouse just as the sun began to rise, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and gray. The building stood silent, unchanged, as if the night before had never happened. Inside, the air felt cool and steady. I walked straight to the steel cabinet and opened it, looking at the neatly organized folders. Legal documents, ownership records, letters from my husband, everything that told the full story of our family's past and ensured its future. He thinks this is about money, I murmured. But it was never just about money. It was about protection. It was about making sure no one could ever tear this family apart the way that betrayal once had. As I closed the cabinet, I felt something shift inside me. Not fear, not even worry. Clarity. Because now I knew Daniel wasn't just asking questions anymore. He was searching. And searching always leads somewhere. That afternoon Eliza called. Her voice sounded tired, strained. Daniel says he's thinking about starting his own investment firm, she said, trying to sound cheerful. He's been under a lot of pressure. I listened quietly, hearing the unspoken weight behind her words. And how are you feeling? I asked gently. There was a pause. I'm fine, she said softly. But she didn't sound fine. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet, remembering the way Daniel had looked at the warehouse. Not like a man exploring possibilities, but like a man running out of options. That night, as I prepared for bed, the small device on my nightstand vibrated again. Another alert. I picked it up slowly, my pulse steady, because deep down I already knew what it meant. He wasn't giving up. He was getting closer. And as I stood there in the soft glow of the bedside lamp, I felt the weight of years of preparation settle around me like armor. Daniel thought he was uncovering a secret. But secrets have histories. And histories have consequences. Somewhere across town he was moving forward, convinced he was finally closing in on what he wanted. He had no idea that with every step he took, he was walking straight toward the truth that would unravel everything. And for the first time since this began, I allowed myself to whisper the words I had been holding back. I'm ready. Daniel attempts the break-in and discovers he's not alone. The night Daniel came back to the warehouse, the air felt different. Not colder. Not quieter. Just final. I arrived long before he did. The sky still deep blue with the last traces of sunset fading behind the empty industrial buildings. The streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Like lines drawn toward an inevitable ending. Inside, the warehouse smelled the same as it always had: dust, old wood, faint oil. But tonight every sound felt sharper. Every echo more deliberate. I walked slowly through the aisles, my footsteps soft against the concrete floor, until I reached the back where the steel cabinet stood waiting. For a moment I rested my hand against it, feeling the cool metal beneath my palm, grounding myself in everything it represented: years of patience, years of silence, years of protection. You always said this day might come, I whispered, thinking of my husband. I just didn't know it would look like this. I set the leather folder on the small table beside the cabinet and sat down in the chair facing the main aisle, the only overhead light turned on, casting a soft circle of illumination around me while the rest of the warehouse remained in shadow. Then I waited. There's a particular stillness that comes when you stop running from something and simply allow it to arrive. It isn't fear. It's acceptance. Outside, tires crunched softly on gravel. A car door closed. Footsteps. Slow at first, then more confident as they approached the side entrance. The handle rattled once. Twice. Then the door opened with a low creak. Daniel stepped inside, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the darkness before landing on me. He froze. For a moment neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy with everything that had led to this moment. Well, I said calmly, folding my hands in my lap. It took you long enough. His expression shifted rapidly: shock, confusion, then something darker, something harder. You shouldn't be here, he said, his voice low, tight with tension. I think, I replied softly, this is exactly where I should be. He stepped further inside. The door swinging closed behind him with a dull thud that echoed through the space. His eyes moved quickly around the warehouse, taking in the cabinet, the folder, and the single light above me. You've been hiding things, he said, the words sharp. I've been protecting things, I corrected gently. For who? He demanded. For yourself? For your precious house? Do you have any idea what you're keeping from Eliza? I held his gaze steadily. I know exactly what I've been keeping safe. His jaw tightened, the mask he usually wore slipping away completely now, revealing the raw frustration beneath. You think you're better than me, he said bitterly. You sit in your big house judging everyone, deciding who deserves what. This was never about deserving, I said quietly. It was about trust. He laughed harshly, the sound echoing off the metal walls. Trust? You don't trust me because you think I'm after your money. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached beside me and placed my hand gently on the leather folder. I don't think, I said calmly. I know. His eyes flicked to the folder, curiosity and anger colliding in his expression. What is that? He asked. The truth, I replied. For a moment, the warehouse seemed to hold its breath. Then he stepped forward quickly, stopping just outside the circle of light. You've been lying to Eliza, he said, his voice rising. You've been turning her against me. I never had to, I said softly. Your actions did that all on their own. His hands curled into fists. You don't understand anything about our marriage. No, I said gently. But I understand patterns. That stopped him for a moment. I opened the folder slowly, the sound of paper shifting loud in the quiet space. Do you know why this building exists? I asked. He didn't answer, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. It belonged to my husband, I continued. He built his life here. And he learned the hard way what happens when you trust the wrong person. I lifted the first document, letting the light fall across it. Years ago, someone we trusted betrayed us. Nearly destroyed everything. So we made sure it could never happen again. Daniel's eyes narrowed. What does that have to do with me? Everything, I said. I placed the document on the table. Ownership records, trust agreements, legal protections layered carefully over decades. The house, I continued calmly, is protected by a family trust. It can't be sold. It can't be transferred. It isn't accessible to anyone outside the trust. His face went still. The investments are protected the same way, I said. His breathing changed, slower, heavier. And any inheritance, I added softly, goes directly to Eliza alone, not to a spouse, not to anyone else. The silence that followed felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. You're lying, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I met his gaze steadily. No, I'm prepared. For a long moment he just stood there, the reality settling over him piece by piece. Everything he thought he could access was never within his reach. His expression shifted again, the frustration melting into something far more dangerous. You did this on purpose, he said quietly. I did this to protect my family, I replied. His eyes darkened. You think you've won? This was never a competition, I said softly, but something inside him snapped. He stepped forward suddenly, knocking the chair back as he reached for the folder. You don't get to decide everything, he shouted. Before he could grab it, another voice cut through the warehouse. That's enough, Daniel. He froze. Slowly he turned toward the entrance. Eliza stood just inside the doorway, her face pale but steady, her eyes fixed on him. Behind her, 2 uniformed police officers stepped into the light. For a moment, Daniel looked like he couldn't breathe. Eliza, he said, his voice softening instantly, the old charm trying to resurface. You don't understand. She's been manipulating you. Eliza didn't move. No, she said quietly. I think I finally understand everything. The officers stepped forward calmly. Daniel, one of them said, we're going to need you to come with us. His gaze snapped back to me, fury burning behind his eyes. This isn't over, he said. I met his stare without flinching. It is. The handcuffs clicked loudly in the silence, the sound echoing through the warehouse like the closing of a long chapter. As they led him toward the door, he looked back once more, his expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. Then he was gone. The warehouse fell quiet again, the tension draining from the air like a storm finally passing. Eliza stepped forward slowly, her eyes moving from me to the documents on the table. "You knew," she whispered. "I hoped I was wrong," I said softly. "But I was ready just in case." She looked around the warehouse, taking in the years of quiet preparation, the layers of protection she had never known existed. For a long moment neither of us spoke. Then she walked forward and wrapped her arms around me, holding on tightly. And as I held her back, feeling the weight of years finally begin to lift, I understood something with perfect clarity. The secret had never been about money. It had always been about making sure the people you love are safe, even when they don't know they need protecting. Emotional aftermath, healing, and final legacy reveal. In the days after Daniel was taken away, the house felt different. Not quieter exactly. It had always been quiet, but lighter, like a window had been opened somewhere I couldn't see, letting fresh air slowly move through rooms that had held their breath for too long. Eliza stayed with me that first week, sleeping in her old bedroom, the same room where she used to line up her stuffed animals along the windowsill and whisper stories to them before falling asleep. Sometimes, late at night, I would hear her walking softly down the hallway, unable to rest, the weight of everything settling over her in waves. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It comes quietly in small moments, a deep breath, a long cry, a memory finally understood. One morning I found her standing in the kitchen, staring out the window with a mug of tea in her hands. "I keep replaying everything," she said softly without turning around. "Every conversation, every moment." I ignored that little voice in my head. I walked over and stood beside her, the morning sun warming the counter between us. "That voice never really goes away," I said gently. "Sometimes it just gets harder to hear when you love someone." She nodded slowly, her eyes distant. "I feel foolish." "You loved," I said. "That's never foolish." For the first time since everything happened, her shoulders relaxed just a little. The legal process moved forward steadily. Statements, paperwork, meetings with lawyers, but inside the house we focused on something more important: rebuilding. One afternoon, about 2 weeks later, Eliza came into the living room holding the leather folder. "Can we go back?" she asked quietly. I knew exactly what she meant. The drive to the warehouse felt different in daylight, the building no longer looming but simply standing, solid and quiet beneath the clear sky. Inside, the air felt still, peaceful in a way it never had before. Eliza walked slowly through the aisles, her fingers brushing lightly against the boxes, the shelves, taking in the space like she was seeing it for the first time. "This place feels," she paused, searching for the word, "safe." "It was always meant to be," I said softly. At the back, I opened the steel cabinet again, letting her see everything: the documents, the letters, the years of careful preparation. She picked up one of the folders, reading quietly, her eyes widening as she began to understand the full story. Not just what Daniel had tried to do, but what her grandfather and I had built to protect her long before she ever needed it. "He loved me this much," she whispered. "He loved you before you even knew what love meant," I said. From the back of the cabinet, I pulled out a small envelope, its edges slightly worn with time. "I think you're ready for this," I said gently, handing it to her. She looked at the handwriting on the front, her grandfather's, and her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was a letter. She read silently at first, then aloud, her voice soft and unsteady. "My dearest Eliza, if you're reading this, it means your grandmother has decided the time is right for you to understand something important. Life will bring you many people, some who will lift you up, and some who will try to take more than they give. I want you to remember that real love never asks you to shrink. It never makes you question your worth. And it never needs to control you to keep you close. Your grandmother and I built these protections not because we expected the worst, but because we believed you deserved the freedom to live without fear. If you ever find yourself lost, remember that you come from strength, from resilience, and from a love that will always stand behind you. With all my love, always, Grandpa." By the time she finished, tears streamed quietly down her face. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders, and for a long moment we just stood there together. The quiet hum of the warehouse surrounding us like a gentle reminder of everything that had been carried and protected within those walls. "I wish he could see me now," she whispered. "He does," I said softly. "In every choice you make." Over the following months, life slowly found a new rhythm. Eliza began seeing a therapist, someone kind and patient who helped her untangle the confusion and pain of the past few years. She started reconnecting with friends she hadn't spoken to in far too long, laughter gradually returning to her voice in small, genuine bursts. Some evenings we would sit together on the porch watching the sunset, saying little, just enjoying the quiet comfort of being together. One afternoon, as we were planting flowers in the garden, she looked up at me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you regret not telling me sooner?" she asked. I paused, brushing soil from my hands, considering the question carefully. "I regret that you had to go through pain," I said honestly. "But I don't regret being ready when you needed me." She nodded slowly, understanding settling in her eyes. "I think," she said softly, "that's what love really looks like." Months later, we returned to the warehouse one last time. Together we sorted through the boxes, keeping some things, donating others, turning what had once been a place of secrecy into simply a place of memories. When we finished, I stood in the center of the space, listening to the gentle echo of our footsteps. "For years," I said quietly, "this place held everything we needed to protect. But now, it's just a building." Eliza smiled, slipping her hand into mine. "Because the real protection isn't here anymore." I looked at her, at the strength and clarity in her eyes, and felt a warmth spread through my chest. "No," I said softly. "It's here." We stepped outside into the afternoon sunlight, closing the door behind us, not as a fortress sealing away secrets, but as a chapter gently coming to an end. That evening, back at the house, I sat in my favorite chair watching Eliza laugh on the phone with a friend, her voice light and free in a way I hadn't heard in years. And as I listened, I thought about everything that had happened, the years of quiet preparation, the long nights of doubt, the moment everything finally came to light. People often think love is loud, dramatic, and impossible to miss. But sometimes the strongest love is quiet. It waits, prepares, it protects. Not for recognition, not for gratitude, but simply because that's what love does. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and rose, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. The promise I made had been kept. Not perfectly, not without pain, but faithfully. Because in the end, the greatest legacy we can leave isn't money or property. It's the certainty that someone loved us enough to stand guard over our future, even when we couldn't see the danger ourselves. And that, I realized, was the real secret that the warehouse had been holding all along. Not documents, not protection plans, but proof that love, patient, steady, unwavering love, is the strongest safeguard of all.